Welcome to this evening's event. Don't Single Us Out, PORAT's report on the realities of single modern Orthodox Jews. I'm Rabbi David Schwartz, and as the president of PORAT, I have the honor of sharing brief opening remarks before introducing tonight's moderator. In Parshas Naso, which we read in the diaspora yesterday, God commands Moshe to send all those who are impure outside the camp. The Midrash wonders why this commandment is juxtaposed with the census of the tribe of Levi. And it explains that the Torah is highlighting how we have two potential paths in life. We can do things that bring us closer to God, as the Leviim encamped immediately adjacent to the Mishkan, or we can act in a manner that distances ourselves from God. Unfortunately, today, people can feel like they were sent outside the camp, even in the absence of these spiritual impurities. As we heard in December from our panelists, sometimes single people feel ostracized from the rest of the modern Orthodox community. Many who participated in the process groups after the program shared similar feelings. So we at PORAT decided to investigate the issue further and see what could be done. Our follow-up survey and other research confirmed that single individuals of all ages and backgrounds feel invisible. Today, we will hear additional detail regarding the situation and what we in our communities can do about it to create a community where every member feels valued. Hopefully, like the Leviim, we will make choices that bring us closer to one another and to Hashem. To lead our conversation this evening and introduce our two main speakers, I'm honored to introduce Ora Weinbeck, who has also moderated our December panel and has been involved in this current PORAT effort for nearly a year. Ora just graduated from Yale Divinity School with her master's in divinity. She's a Wexner Graduate Fellow and the Young Israel of Brookline's community educator and a participant in Or Torah Stone's International Halacha Scholars Program. Ora received a BA in Jewish education from Yeshiva University and is a certified sexuality educator, teaching human sexuality to teens and parents while consulting with Jewish day schools on sexuality education curriculum development and execution. Our topic this evening is of particular importance to Ora because she experienced adult singlehood on the Upper West Side for a number of years following her divorce. Ora has since remarried and currently lives in Brookline, Massachusetts. Ora, thank you so much for working with PORAT on this project, and the floor is yours to begin this evening's presentation.
Thanks so much, David, for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this evening's program. It's such a privilege to return as a moderator for PORAT's second event focusing on single adults in the modern Orthodox Jewish community. Many of you here with us this evening participated in December's panel event titled, When Things Don't Work Out the Way as Planned, Single Heads of Household in the Orthodox Jewish Community. We were joined then by three amazing panelists who shared their unique individual stories of adult singlehood. If you missed it, we're dropping the link into the chat now, so make sure to watch the recording. When the planning committee initially conceived of that event, our goal was to increase communal sensitivity towards a population that generally tends to be marginalized in our community. It became immediately and overwhelmingly obvious that while we may have accomplished that goal, something else happened too. Creating space for people, myself included, to talk about proudly and confidently and openly and personally about our experiences of singlehood evoked an overwhelming wave of responses. Self-identified singles of all backgrounds, ages, identities from across the US and even internationally had stories to tell, and more importantly, grievances to be heard and advice to give. There were many possible next steps that PORAT could have taken to follow up on that panel and the grassroots response that it garnered. The planning team, which includes many self-identified modern Orthodox singles, decided to use the momentum to do research. For most of our panelists this evening, research is exciting, but for many other people, it maybe tickles a little bit less. However, it felt like the most concrete, undeniable, and lasting way to not only talk about our experiences, but marshal those experiences to create tangible change in our community. Therefore, PORAT enlisted Dr. Sylvia Barak-Fishman to conduct research and ultimately publish a pamphlet summarizing her findings that has been and will continue to be shared widely, including by the National Council of Young Israel, the International Rabbinic Fellowship, and the Rabbinical Council of America. The full text of this pamphlet has been emailed to all registrants, and I encourage you to read it. Sylvia was an amazing scholar to have on board, and we are privileged to hear from her this evening. She is a professor of contemporary Jewish life at Brandeis University and is the author of 8 books and numerous articles discussing Jewish identity, education, and the interplay of American and Jewish values, American Jewish families, portrayal of Jews and Jewishness in fiction and film, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and Israel diaspora relations. And now also the PORAT report, responding to the realities of single modern Orthodox Jews. We hope that through this research, the voices of hundreds of single adults will be amplified and reverberate throughout our community to create lasting change. Also joining us this evening is Mark Trencher, the head of Nishma Research, which conducts research in the Orthodox Jewish community. He also hosts the Orthonomics podcast, which explores issues of importance to the Orthodox community. Mark has conducted 11 broad communal studies, including the most recent one, Orthodox Jewry, Community, Connection, Understanding, and Orthodox Jewish Singles. We will be hearing from him about his research on this topic as well. The goal of this evening is to continue the conversation that started in December, grounding those narratives in data and research. First, Sylvia and Mark will present their research, findings, and recommendations. Then I will engage them in conversation about these presentations with an eye towards the reception and implementation of their reports. Finally, we will turn to you, the audience, for questions. Throughout the program, please feel free to use the chat to send me questions. I will do my best to collate, collect, and convey your questions to Sylvia and Mark during Q&A. So first, let's get started by hearing from you, Sylvia, about the research that you conducted in the PORAT report.
Thanks so much, Ora, and thank you, Rabbi Schwartz, as well. I'm really delighted to be sharing with you this evening information which is really based on the voices of singles. That, I think, is key to what's happening in this program. I am, first of all, extremely grateful to the singles who honestly and carefully and thoughtfully shared their experiences and their ideas. One of the things that we need to realize immediately is that the proportion of singles in the modern Orthodox community today, which is larger than the proportion was a few decades ago, is following the parameters of American life in general, but that's not new. American Orthodox Jews have always followed the parameters of American life. So if we look at patterns during the Depression, Orthodox Jews got married much later because it was the Depression, just like non-Orthodox Jews and non-Jews did. In the 1950s, immediately after the Second World War, all Americans got married earlier and in much larger proportions. And so did modern Orthodox Jews. So today, when we're looking at the fact that about 30% of modern Orthodox Jews are single when they begin their 30s, and we know that that is different than modern Orthodox patterns were a few decades ago, we have to remember that it's not unusual for modern Orthodox Jews to respond to the conditions in the United States because that's where they live. So this is very much an American Jewish story that we're talking about. When we first started to look at the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments and verbatim quotes by singles who were never married or who were divorced or who were widowed about their experiences and their recommendations, one of the things that perhaps surprised us a little bit was we thought that this was mostly going to be about meeting people, but that was not the most common area of commentary. The most pressing, passionate concern of many, many of the singles from their 20s through their 70s was being treated like a full adult and like an equal in synagogues, in Jewish schools, in Jewish organizations. Singles talked about the fact that they want respect, friendliness, and inclusion, that a person's status in Jewish institutions should not be dependent on their marital status. And one of the interesting things was that they recommended that singles be appointed as heads of committees, as presidents of synagogues, as a way of showing the respect that these institutions have for singles. They want to see themselves up there. Immediately after this concern about being shown that they are full participants in the same way of that people of any marital status are, there was a concern about just plain ordinary friendliness and interaction with people in congregations. Many singles said that the only time they get to talk to people and get to know people as human beings is Kiddush. That is because in many congregations, activities are divided up, subdivided, you could say, by what a person's age and marital status are, which means that singles are automatically being confined to a kind of echo chamber. And that was a complaint that came again across the age spectrum. People really asked that the default mode be that all activities should be open to everyone so that people can meet and get to know a full range of others in the congregation. I would say with the exception of the youngest singles in their 20s and 30s would like to meet a lot of people, but they would really also like to be together with their own demographic. So we really have a two-part message there where the general approach should be that everything is open to everyone, regardless of age, gender, marital status, but that there should be a selection of activities which are tailored for a particular demographic so that they can get to know people who are more like themselves. Also, in terms of synagogue functioning, divorced people talked about the fact that if their children were the opposite gender, they were often isolated on the other side of the mechitza. They recommended that there be a kind of buddy system. They said it's not enough for some kind soul to say, sit near me to their son or daughter, because the kids get a little freaked out when it's somebody different every time, that it would be better to have consistency so that the kids always know that they have a makom kabua, they have a place to go where there will be a friendly face. And the adults also like a friendly face. One woman complimenting a married woman said, that she invited her to sit down next to her. She talked to her, not that I'm recommending talking in Shul, you understand, but she talked to her, and then she said, next week when you come, sit next to me again. So that kind of simple friendship was something that people really wanted a lot. What they didn't want, and this was a new term, they invented a new word, which is to be Shabbos. To be Shabbos means that someone who has never said 3 words to you before comes up and makes the assumption that you don't have a place to go and invites you home for lunch. What they recommended was nothing too complicated. Talk to them for 10 minutes first. Get to know them. And if you can remember to call them on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, that's even better. But the idea that there should be a human relationship there. And so many of the things that singles asked for were based on, think about what it would feel like if it were you. So that's synagogues. There were also a number of recommendations that clustered around Jewish schools. Singles strongly urged that there be education to help the people who will grow up to be singles have healthy relationships with the opposite gender. They pointed out that especially in schools where kids are separated by gender from the age of 5 or 6 or 7, boys lose touch with what girls really are, and girls don't understand what boys really are. And then when they start dating, it's like they're dating Martians. And often there are awkwardnesses. Sometimes there's worse than awkwardnesses, inappropriate behavior, cluelessness, things which are unhealthy even. And it's important for men and women to be educated. What are the expectations? How do you talk to the opposite gender? What are friendly and appropriate ways to behave? How does one carry on a conversation? So for sort of from the sublime to the ridiculous, really giving a sense to younger children and then to teenagers as they head into their young adult years. And then there were recommendations which were not synagogue-based and not school-based, but applied to social situations in general. Those kinds of recommendations stand something as obvious once you hear it, as remember that singles like to socialize with people that they have something in common with. So the negative example that someone provided was a professional woman of 35 and a graduate student of 22 were put at the children's table at a wedding, while all the people in their age group were put with other people in their age group who happened to be married. And that's the kind of thing that when you read it, it's startling. But there were many other things of that nature where people just hadn't thought about the fact that even though singles are not coupled at the moment, they have the same needs and interests as people who are married. Another issue which came up repeatedly in all the different age groups was creating more natural, organic ways for singles to meet each other. And it was actually rather amusing. People who were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s used to socialize that way all the time. They recalled many marriages that were made when people sat together at a table. There were singles tables at weddings, and that's how they met each other. That was actually a very common way that people used to meet each other. Singles in their 20s and 30s had not experienced that, some of them, but their parents told them about it. So they say, oh, we heard that in the old days that this is the way people used to meet. And those words, natural and organic, echoed over and over again in the comments of singles. Sometimes these situations can be constructed, even when they don't occur so naturally. So singles asked, for example, for the idea of Shabbaton, that there should be a Shabbaton where people from the entire region can get together and meet people that they haven't yet met. And then once we start thinking about creating natural organic ways for singles to socialize, I'm sure that many ideas would come up. So just to conclude my comments, it became clear reading these hundreds and hundreds of personal testimonies that the singles had provided, that modern Orthodox institutions have in certain ways been so focused on supporting families that they have sort of been discriminating against singles, going all the way from charging more for singles activities often than families activities, to just the kind of thoughtlessnesses, microaggressions, one might say today, that sometimes occur in the lives of singles. And the PORAT report does not mean to suggest that support for families should be any less warm and strong than it is now. But that the tent should be opened, and there should be an equal amount of resources as well as attention devoted to embracing the very important, significant population of singles within our midst.
Thank you so much for that, Sylvia. There's so much there, and it's really so interesting. And hopefully we're going to have a chance to respond to some of the things you shared a little bit later. For now, though, I'd like to turn the floor over to you, Mark, for you to share a little bit about the research you conducted about this population.
Okay, thank you, Ora. So we've done 12 studies, and usually after we do a study, I almost always hear from somebody. We did a study of the broad community, modern Orthodox, and I heard from somebody saying, well, Mark, what about Balei Tshuva? You got to do a survey of our group. And I've done studies of the modern centrist Orthodox, and I hear back from people saying, well, what about the more yeshivish? So one of the groups that I heard back very often after we did our studies is from single people. They said, what about singles? You have to, and I say, we always include singles, always about a certain percentage of singles, but that's not enough. We really had to ask the questions that are most important to singles. So I thank you, Rabbi Schwartz, for calling me earlier this year to suggest that we do this survey. And we did a survey, and the survey the actual name of the survey is Orthodox Jewry, Community, Connection, Understanding, and Orthodox Jewish Singles. I had the Orthodox Jewish Singles at the end because the survey also included married people, and there were many aspects of singleness that we wanted to get the attitudes of married people as well. I could parse this title as follows. I could parse the title saying, Orthodox Jewry values community and connection very much. And what we need to do is develop a better understanding of how that affects Orthodox Jewish singles. I've given talks about my study twice in the last week. One was on a podcast and one was in my shul. And in both cases, it was publicized as Orthodox Jewish singles and the shidduch crisis, which is the problem of matchmaking and getting people married. So the survey did cover that aspect. The survey did ask questions about dating and frequency of dating and where people get their dates and what kind of people they're looking for and how they rate the dating system. But what I would like to focus on in my comments now is not so much the dating system as the hypothesis that went in to starting this survey. And my hypothesis was that single people, we found in 2017, we asked people, what gives you the most joy and satisfaction as a modern Orthodox Jew? And we heard back from 4,000 people And by a very wide margin, the number one thing was sense of community, sense of belonging. That was number one. Twice as many people mentioned that as mentioned Shabbat and learning and various other aspects of day-to-day life. So sense of community was very important. So I did start with a hypothesis that was, I get a sense that single people don't have that strong sense of connection. I can use the word alienated if I want to be a little bit hyperbolic, inflammatory. Maybe they're alienated, maybe they're just sad, but for some reason they don't feel connected. So the entire first half of our survey really tried to get at that. Do single people feel connected to the community? And that's why I included married people in my survey of all different ages, Ashkenazim and Sephardim. I also included people that are yeshivish and Hasidic. And there's a whole set of questions up front that really measure the connection. So we started with the question, this is a question we asked in 2017. Do you agree that being an Orthodox observant Jew is an important part of your life? Do you agree with that? And the top box in the answers was, I strongly agree. I strongly agree. And across all of Orthodoxy, pretty much every group strongly agrees. Among married people, 90% strongly agreed that being an Orthodox observant Jew is an important part of their life. And among singles, 80%. So 80% is not terrible. 90% is pretty great. 80% is pretty good. Single people do feel that their Orthodoxy is important to them. Do you go to Shul on Shabbat at least twice a month? At least twice a month. So recognizing that there's been a pandemic, married people said yes. About 70% men and women said, I do go to Shul on Shabbat at least twice a month. Single people, about 60%. So again, you've got a little bit of a 10% difference there, a little bit less engagement. Where this really got interesting was we asked people, married and single, do you have a primary shul, synagogue, that you feel that you're a member of, that you feel a connection to, that you belong to, where you feel welcomed in that shul? So it's a double yes. There's actually two questions, and we combined the results. So we did find that among married people, 70% said yes, there is a shul, it's my primary shul, I consider it my shul, I go to it often, and I feel welcomed in the shul, 70%. Among single people, that dropped to 47%. So here we're starting to see a difference here. Here we're starting to see that single people don't feel, they may not feel that they have a shul that is their shul, maybe they don't go, maybe they just don't feel connected to that shul, but even more so, they don't feel welcome in that shul. So that was a significant difference. So what we ended up doing is we asked quite a few questions about connection to shul, connection to the community, connection to a local Jewish organizations, connection to local people, a rabbi, a rebbe, and rabbanit. And I created something that I called the Index of Overall Communal Connections. So we researchers like to combine questions together and create indexes. So this is an index. You can look up the report and see how it was constructed, but it goes from 0 to 100. Zero means the person totally does not feel connected at all to the community, the people, the organizations. 100 means person feels strongly connected. And the good news is that among all of Orthodoxy, the number came in at 77%. So even after the pandemic, people do feel connected. 77% is closer to 100, closer to full connection than it is to 50-50. That's pretty good. We did look at different groups. Men and women were about the same. It does go up as you moved from modern Orthodox to Yeshivish and Hasidic. It did go up a little bit. The Yeshivish and Hasidic people did have a stronger connection, which is perhaps explainable by the fact that they do go to Shul more often. They may go to Daf Yomi in Shul. It does go up with age as well, but among all the groups, marrieds came in at a very strong 81%. Singles came in at 69%. So among all the cuts, that was the biggest difference. The singles had the lowest level of communal connection. Among all the more than a dozen groups we looked at, the only group that came, the second lowest rating was LGBTQ, which was at 72%. But among all the groups, it was single people that had the lowest level of connection. the connection goes down with age. I will just share with you that among single men, their level of connection to the community goes down after approximately age 40. Among single women, their level of connection to the community starts to drop at age 30. And if you think through that, there may be some understanding of why that is the case. So that was the first half of our study dealing with connection. It led to the second half of the study, which asked all the questions about dating, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go into that other than to share just one thing we learned. One of the questions we asked is, what are your top personal goals in life at this time as a single person? So the conventional wisdom is that they're all trying to get married. And as Sylvia mentioned, that there's a lot more to the story than that. So we did find that among all singles, yes, it's true that by a very small margin, marriage was at the top of the list. About 60% said one of their goals is getting married, but overall happiness was right up there. Personal growth was right up there, and very close to the top were financial success and stability, religious growth, career, health. So single people are complicated. Yes, many of them do want to get married, but there are many other aspects that they're pursuing at various times in their life. So as I mentioned, the aspects of this research dealing with dating are all in the report. You can look them up online. I actually did notice that some of those conclusions are in Sylvia's report, so we can get to that in a few minutes. But thank you very much, Ora.
Thank you so much, Mark. There's really a lot there to dig into, and I hope we'll have a chance in a minute. But I wanted to just first open the floor to both of you. You each listened to the other present your findings, and I'm curious to hear if you have questions for each other about something that you heard or something you would like clarified or more information about. So since Mark, since you just shared and it's fresh in your mind, Sylvia, I'm curious if anything stood out to you in Mark's presentation.
I'm very curious about the gender difference. In the verbatim quotes that I read from Mark's study and the PORAT study, and also some materials that had been collected by the Union of Orthodox Congregations, the observation was that women start to feel like there's really no place for them in the synagogue. And men at least get counted for a minyan. And I'm not recommending halachic change here. I'm simply talking about the human dimension of what people experience in the synagogue. When women feel socially isolated and there's no role for them, then they stop coming to the synagogue. And I was curious, Mark, with your data, did you get responses from women, or were they sort of not there to give the responses because there were already fewer of them? What do you feel about the research that you did in terms of gender, especially at the crucial time period where it seems like more women than men drop out? You said men drop out after 40 and women drop out after 30. So what does your research show us about gender differences?
Well, yes. So what it showed, as you mentioned, that as I mentioned before, the connection to the community does drop among women earlier. By the time women are in their 30s, they already feel less connected. Men do maintain that connection. It drops after age 40. But to me, the one major difference between men and women did show up, not so much in the connection to the community in Shul, but it showed up later on when I started asking questions about dating and what people look for. And we did find differences between men and women in those aspects as well. So for example, when we asked, what do you look for in a dating partner / spouse, the women are looking for different things than the men. But yeah, we did find gender differences. We also found that among marrieds, men are a little bit more connected to their community than women. Again, it could be because of the minyan and the shul, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But the sharp early drop among women at age 30 was, I think, one of the more surprising findings.
Yeah, so if I could just kind of comment on this conversation, I think one of the things that is important to recognize is in this conversation, we're talking maybe specifically about singlehood, but inclusion in a community and feeling part of something has a lot to do with a whole host of ways that a community Freudian slip, a community signals who or what is valued and important. And those things intersect with each other in lots of ways. So marital status is one. In our community, certainly gender is another one. Physical ability and appearance is another. And we could list a whole host of them. And so I think it's always important to be aware of the fact that even as we discuss one demographic factor, that factor intersects in different ways with other demographic factors, right? That myself, right, as a woman, we feel oftentimes in general more disenfranchised from Orthodox communal life than men do. And so I'm actually not surprised that, right, that that Orthodox single women at the age of 30 kind of like hit the point where they're like, okay, I'm done with this. This is too frustrating. And that happens for them before it happens to men. So I think this is an important place to acknowledge the way that this is just one little slice of a broader conversation about what our community values and honors in a whole host of ways. And that respondents got to in the suggestions in terms of seeing themselves as participants in boards and committees and leadership in synagogues, and who it is that we hold up in our communities as examples of people who we honor and are proud of. So yeah, I really appreciate that question. So yeah, I think it's a really awesome point. Mark, was there something in anything that Sylvia shared that you wanted to comment on or thought was particularly interesting?
Yeah, so this is more a comment. This is more an observation, and I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but in your 10 points, numbers 8, 9, and 10 really are actually the 3 major points that kept coming up in the discussion relating to shidduchim and marriage and matchmaking and getting people ready for it. So number 8 about discouraging singles from writing job qualification style lists. We did in one of the talks I gave, I got a sample of a shidduch resume, a piece of paper describing a young man. There was only one piece of personal information in this entire document, and that was his height. It did list some of his jobs, but I would argue that having your jobs don't really tell us much about you. But all the rest of it was just references in his yeshiva, references in his shul, his parents' references. So it ends up being a huge document that enables somebody to do reference checking and to say no even before you meet the person. So that was your observation number 8 of avoiding that. I think is very important. You mentioned creating natural, organic opportunities for men and women to interact with each other. That comes up often. And I think in the modern Orthodox community, there are opportunities to have men and women meet each other, to meet people. Research has shown that if you may have a list of qualifications that you are looking for, but if you meet a person first, that often will preempt your mindset. Oh, I thought I needed X, Y, and Z, but I just met a person, and he or she doesn't have X, Y, and Z or Z, but they do have R, S, and T, different qualifications, just to pick 3 random letters. So that's important, the organic meeting. And I also heard from women, you mentioned women versus men. I heard from a number of women that for some reason they feel that the men that are out there, especially once you get into your 30s and 40s, just are not really, they're not looking to get married. They don't have the skills. They're not motivated. So I heard from a number of women that wouldn't it be great if some of the boys' schools, educationally, high schools and yeshivas, actually got the men more ready for dating and marriage. And Sylvia, you mentioned the number 10, this probably being a good thing for both genders. So I was very intrigued to see that of these 10, number 8, 9, and 10, there seemed to be a clear demarcation. 1 through 7 are really things that shuls and organizations can do now for the singles in their community. And the others 3 are 3 very, very important initiatives that the community can undertake to help these people, and also to help people that are getting ready to become, to start dating.
That whole issue of resume writing, I think is a fascinating one. In some earlier conversations, some of us have been talking a lot about what I sometimes call the commodification of human relationships. That when you're thinking about getting someone, like getting a car or getting a new dishwasher, and you have a list of what you're looking for in that car or a new dishwasher, that's what I meant by commodification. The problem with the resume writing, when you're thinking about the other person, you're writing a job description, I guess you would call it, rather than a resume, is that it really sometimes keeps people from seeing the whole person. So you mentioned, Mark, when you meet the whole person, you discover they have RST. But if you've got in your mind, almost like kind of blinders, this job description of what you're looking for, then you never get to really perceive the other person as a whole person. And this was said by many of the singles, not talking about themselves, but talking about some of the people they were meeting. And actually there I did see gender differences also. Women complained that men were looking for certain things and that they couldn't see the person because of that. And men complained the same thing about women, except it was different things that they thought the women were looking for. And of course, once one has been sensitized to that, that creates its own problem. Because if you think when someone asks you, what do you do? Which it can be a perfectly conversational question. When I met Ora for the first time, I said, what do you do? But it becomes perceived as how much money do you make? So there are these negative unintended results with both the resumes and the job descriptions, that it sensitizes people on the other side of the equation, so that sometimes not only is one person not seeing the whole person, but the other person can't even answer conversational questions in a comfortable and natural way because of the possibility that something else is being asked. So you said, Ora, that we're dealing with things that are much broader than marital status. We certainly are. We're dealing with what it is to be a human being, really. And it's about these issues that all of these human dimensions become magnified.
Yeah, and I think that observation that the last kind of 3 pieces were maybe a little bit more about the future, or were more about dating and relationships among singles, I think is an astute one. And I appreciate that we have the chance to talk about that. And I want to shift the rest of our conversation to the first half of, or first not half, for 3/4, like these 7 recommendations that really call on change to be made in communal and institutional settings. Because part of, I think, what the goal here in having this research is that we hopefully have on this call and that have read this report, many communal leaders and people who are in positions to really hear the voices of the concrete changes that we want to be seeing happening institution-wide. So I'm curious if you guys can kind of share, as we think about implementation, what are the kind of next steps in getting these recommendations and this research implemented in synagogues and in other kinds of Jewish communal organizations?
Well, I think one thing that could happen is I'm looking at, as you're talking, Ora, I'm looking at what I'm calling the 10 suggestions, because after all, we've just had the 10 commandments that we read. Synagogues need to actually devote both human resources and financial resources to singles. And they can actually implement the first and second suggestion while they are thinking about what to do next. Bring the singles into the process. In other words, it should not be noblesse oblige. It shouldn't be people who are already powerful in the synagogue deciding what to do, although they should decide to do it. But bring the singles in, make them the chairs or the sub-chairs or whatever of the process. So that's bringing them in at least to one committee. And then think about what are the activities and how do we get rid of the singles tax of charging for singles events while the synagogue subsidizes all the family events. So the singles events are now going to be part of the functioning of the synagogue, and also exploring regional kinds of activities, but bring the singles into the process. That's where I would start.
Yes, I would add to that. Every time after I do a survey, people call me and they say, well, so what happened? What was done? Was any benefit? Did anybody learn anything? And sadly, I very often have to say, I really don't know. So I want to give a big yasher koach, kudos, congratulations to PORAT and you, David, because I think in this case, we are actually trying to implement positive change. And my hope is that when I'm asked the question in the future, I'll be able to point to things. You know, I think you've created a wonderful plan, Sylvia, 10 items. It's a 6-page document. I would encourage shuls. I would encourage every shul, just as a shul has a president, vice president, secretary, treasurer. If a shul has somebody in charge of the building to make sure that the snow gets shoveled and the lawn looks nice, why can't the shul have a chief singles officer, or even better, every shul should have a team of 2 people, 1 single and 1 married, and at every quarter they should report on success in one of the, they should report, we tackled item number 1 on the document, and here's what we have to report. So actually give them some responsibility. Say I would ask them which people in your shul have taken on the ownership. That's kind of the word that's used in the business world. Who's taken on the ownership of this? And we'd love to hear a report from you 3 months from now on at least only one. It would be great if it's more than 1, but tell us what you did on 1 or 2 of these 10 items. And let's just keep it going. Let's you know, some of these don't involve a lot of expense. They just involve a mindset. You know, the event for a quarter could be just we had a meeting and we discussed it and we set a plan to move ahead. How are we going to move ahead? But let's see if we can place a little bit of the, I don't use the word burden, but place a little bit of the responsibility on the hundreds of shuls through the RCA and National Council of Young Israel are already aware of this, and they're ready. They're ready. So let's charge them with taking the next step and moving ahead, and let's hear from them.
Amazing. So in a moment, we're going to open up for audience questions. So if you have a question or comment that you'd like addressed, take the next few minutes to type it up into the chat. You can send it to me directly or to the group. But I just kind of wanted to summarize and amplify what both Sylvia and Mark just said, that if you are listening, no matter who you are, no matter what your relationship status is, you can make significant changes to make our community warmer, welcome, and more welcoming. If you are a synagogue rabbi or on the board, please take this survey, take the report, share it actively with the head of your community, the board chairs, the rabbis, and implement these solutions. And if you are listening and you are not in charge of anything, that doesn't matter either. You are a member of a community and an organization, and be you single or partnered, please take the opportunity to send this pamphlet to people in your synagogue, in your community, because as we said, these are real concrete things that can be implemented, and perhaps there can be a system of accountability, the way that you kind of identified, Mark, but to take the opportunity to really share and demand that communities and communal organizations and shuls and schools do a better job at being aware of the ways in which we can better support and include people of all backgrounds, especially, as we heard from your research, those who are marginalized and who are losing their connections with community. And we can do better. So we're gonna, in a moment, open up to audience questions, and until then, I'm gonna turn over to David for a brief moment. But excited to continue the conversation in a second.
Thank you so much, Ora. I really want to thank you and Mark and Sylvia for this fascinating discussion that we've had this evening. I want to also highlight Mark's comments. We really have here an opportunity for every synagogue to do something about this issue and about making sure that everyone feels included, especially people who are single. And marital status should not determine whether or not you get a particular position within the synagogue and your treatment within the synagogue. And so we ask that everyone on this call, on this Zoom, and everyone who watches it to please help us get the message out and reach out to your synagogue. And if we can be helpful at PORAT, please reach out to us. We're happy to provide assistance in communicating the message that our report has, that there are things that we can do to make the world a more welcoming and open place where people can feel comfortable. I want to thank each and every one of our audience members for joining with us this evening. If you'd like to take this, like I said, to another level and share the information with your synagogue, if we can be helpful, please let us know, and encourage your synagogue leaders to get involved and to do something. Hopefully, we can create a follow-up survey with Mark, with your help, that will actually determine that we've actually made a difference. And so in order to do that, though, we first need to make sure that we get the message out. And so if each of you can help us on that front, that would be terrific. If you'd like more information, please visit our website, poratonline.org. This event will be eventually posted there at poratonline.org/events. And if you aren't already a member of our listserv, please join. We look forward to working together. And let me turn it now back to Ora to deal with some Q&A. Thank you so much.
So I think we're going to have time for one question from the audience for Mark and one directed to Sylvia. But before that happens, I just wanted to clarify. I know there were some comments about this in the chat. At least in this setting and in the PORAT report, when we use the term singles, we are referring to people who have never been married, people who are divorced, people who are widowed and or widower, people who are single parents by choice, people who identify as LGBTQ. And so when we use the term, we use it in the broadest possible way. So I just wanted to clarify that piece of that question that came up in the chat. And I first want to direct a question to you, Mark. Could you share with us a little bit about the demographics of how many, if you have research about this, how many Orthodox singles there are in America and where they might be living, and give us a little bit of a sense about who responds to your survey. Like who do we have information about? How identified do you have to be with the Jewish community to even be willing to take this survey? And who's not even taking this survey? I don't know if that's a possible question to answer, but just some of that demographic information would be helpful.
Sure. First of all, I have heard that single people don't like being referred to as singles. One of the comments was, we're not slices of cheese, so don't call us singles. So in the report, I do refer to them as single individuals. There is no really quality census of the Orthodox community because we're so small. Even the Pew survey has a very small number of Orthodox, so it's all estimates. And there are enough surveys out there that we can estimate that the total modern Orthodox community is about 300,000, of which about 40,000, that this is an estimate, are single people. If you look at the percentages of modern Orthodox that live in the Northeast, the tri-state area, it's about 70%. So it may actually be a little bit more among single individuals, given the clusters of areas like the Upper West Side. So it may well be that there are 30,000 single individuals in the greater New York area. And again, this is just an estimate. One of the challenges of doing research is reaching the audience. So we had this terrific challenge in reaching people who went off the derech, who left Orthodoxy. And one of the things we learned in that survey was that if you reach out to people through their communities and even through social media, and if you're very creative in how you reach out to people, the number one key factor that determines does somebody answer the survey or not is, hey, is this something I'm interested in? And is somebody finally asking me for my opinion on something that I've been thinking about for years? And I have some really strong opinions that I want to share with you. So we did, in this case, we did reach 335 single individuals. As a percentage of the 700 plus people in our survey, they were the single people were represented at a higher percentage than they would be in the community as a whole. And we did that because Rabbi Schwartz and PORAT assembled a really great advisory committee that had some very dynamic single individuals who reached out to communities like YU and Stern and Upper West Side groups and other groups. So we did go out through social media. But again, this is the story of every survey in the Orthodox community. It always takes some creativity. Who responded? You know, are they disproportionately people who are upset? It could be. Are they disproportionately people who are satisfied with where they are in life? That could be. One of the reasons why I always ask a lot of open-ended verbatim questions, not just checklists, because I do feel it's important to read what people are writing in their own words. And those verbatim comments, those 38 pages or so, which are available on my website, those are all comments that Sylvia, you read through every single one of those and coming up with your report. So I think you have to really read not just the statistics of the 335, but listen to what people are saying in their own words.
Thanks. That's a really important reminder. And I also especially appreciate the point that you make about the language that we use to refer to people, single individuals, unmarried, unpartnered. One of the things that I thought that's challenging about this in general, and it's reflected in the report as well, is that not everybody feels the same. As you mentioned earlier in this evening, it's a diverse group. People are complicated. They like to be called different things and referred to in different ways. But I always appreciate a reminder to be careful to refer to people the way in which they would like to be referred to. So thank you for that. Sylvia, my question for you is, what do you think is potential here for further research and study or next steps in terms of moving this forward?
So I'm going to pick up in answering your question a couple of comments that were made in the chat. One of the comments was, is it true that Orthodox Jews think of adulthood as being defined by marriage? So I think that one area for research has to be to look at adult lives which don't involve marriage. The reason why we need research to do this is because it's not just Orthodox Jews who used to define adulthood that way. Sociologists used to say that there were social characteristics that defined adulthood. And the social characteristics that defined adulthood, this is, through the 1980s for sure, were being financially independent, being married, living separately from your parents. You can already hear how many of these are not true of adults today, right? So I think that in order to think about how can we redefine adulthood, we need to look at the lives of people. And again, this is research that I would love to see. People who fit into all of the different kinds of currently not married groups should be involved in that. And then another area where we need research comes out of another comment that was made. Singles asked to be leaders, but the person who asked the question was, wouldn't that just mean a lot more men in powerful positions? What can women do? So I, off the top of my head, could think of things that women can do, like be presidents of shuls, heading up committees, giving talks in shul, after shul, on a Monday morning, on a Wednesday night, giving shiurim in the shul, leading art groups, teaching Israeli dancing. That would probably be for other women, leading chesed committees. That's just brainstorming, but I think that this is worthy of research also, of shuls that exist, of modern Orthodox shuls that exist. Let's do research and see let's look at what success, how would we define success? What would a shul look like that actually has activities open to everyone, where people don't think, oh, it's a shiur, it's just for guys, where women are actively involved, where men are actively involved, where LGBTQ people feel comfortable. Let's look at these congregations that are doing some of it successfully. Nobody does everything perfectly, but let's look for models of success that we can then help other congregations to respond to, and other institutions to respond to. I would love to have especially the models of success research, because I think it helps people move towards different ways of thinking and different behaviors if they can look at something that's already happening, where it's not trying to imagine perfection, but looking at people who are already doing things in a good way that others can emulate.
Yeah, well, with that, I'm feeling the charge, and I'm hoping that PORAT here, and that all of you listening, and that synagogues across the country take that charge to heart, and really make changes and take advantage of this survey. And we really hope to continue this conversation. I see, Mark, you put your information in the chat for people who would like to learn more and reach out to Nishma Research. And I know that Rabbi David Schwartz is interested in continuing the conversation from the PORAT end. This is something we're all passionate about. So please continue talking about this. Reach out to us, share your thoughts and reactions, and bring this energy into your home communities. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. Especially thank you to you, Rabbi Trencher and Dr. Fishman, and to Rabbi Schwartz for joining us and making this happen. So have a good night, everyone. And we hope that this conversation continues and amplifies for years to come.